Ranger's body went rigid in the middle of the crosswalk, every muscle locked, his dark eyes fixed on something across the street that Officer Devin Harlow couldn't see. The German Shepherd's lips pulled back slowly, exposing teeth. A low rumble building in his chest that Devin had only heard twice before in 3 years of partnership. Both times, someone had been carrying a weapon. Both times, Ranger had been right. But this morning, the street was nearly empty. A few early commuters. A delivery truck idling at the corner. And a small girl standing in the shadow of a closed storefront, maybe 6 years old, watching them with eyes too still for a child. "Easy," Devin murmured, his hand tightening on the leash as Ranger's growl deepened. The dog shifted his weight forward, not lunging but ready, protective, positioned between Devin and the girl like she was the threat. It didn't make sense. She was tiny, wearing a faded pink jacket too thin for the October cold, her dark hair tangled and unwashed. Her hands were empty. She wasn't moving. But Ranger didn't trust her. The light changed. A car honked behind them. Devin pulled gently on the leash, trying to guide his partner forward, but Ranger resisted for 3 long seconds before finally obeying. His head stayed turned toward the girl the entire time, ears pinned back, body tense and coiled. Devin glanced over his shoulder as they reached the opposite sidewalk. The girl was still there, still watching, her expression unreadable in the early morning shadows. "What was that about?" Devin asked quietly, crouching beside Ranger once they were clear of the intersection. He ran his hand along the dog's shoulders, feeling the tremor of adrenaline still running through him. Ranger's gaze never left the storefront across the street. His breathing was fast and shallow, focused, like he was tracking something invisible. Devin had learned to trust his partner's instincts without question. Ranger had found lost hikers in the woods, tracked suspects through crowds, detected traces of explosives that machines missed. The dog's nose and intuition had saved lives. But this felt different. The girl wasn't hiding a weapon or running from a crime scene. She was just standing there, small and silent and alone. And Ranger was treating her like a danger. Devin straightened slowly, scanning the area for anything out of place. No suspicious vehicles. No adults lingering nearby. The street was waking up around them, coffee shops opening their doors, buses pulling away from stops. Normal. Safe. But Ranger's body language said otherwise, and that made Devin's pulse quicken, despite the calm morning. He looked back at the storefront one more time. The girl was gone. "Come on, boy," Devin said softly, tugging the leash toward the precinct 2 blocks away. Ranger followed this time, but his head kept turning back, nostrils flaring, taking in scents Devin couldn't begin to identify. Whatever the dog had sensed, it hadn't left him. The tension stayed in his stride all the way to the station. Inside the precinct, Devin filled Ranger's water bowl and sat down at his desk, the encounter still playing on a loop in his mind. It wasn't the first time he'd seen a kid on the street alone that early. Runaways, kids sneaking out, sometimes just early risers walking to a friend's house. But something about this one stuck with him. The way she'd stood so still, the way she'd been watching them. No, watching Ranger, like she was waiting for something. And the way his partner, the most reliable and steady K9 he'd ever worked with, had reacted like she was a threat he needed to neutralize. Devin opened the missing persons database on his computer, scrolling through recent reports. No matches for a girl that age in their district. No Amber Alerts. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes, telling himself he was overthinking it. Maybe she'd just startled Ranger. Maybe the dog had picked up a scent from something else nearby, and Devin had misread the direction of his focus. But he didn't believe that. Ranger was lying at his feet now, chin resting on his paws, but his ears were still swiveling toward the door every time someone walked past. He was listening. Waiting. The unease hadn't left him either. "Harlow." Sergeant Renata Voss leaned against the edge of his desk, coffee in hand, eyebrow raised. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Rough patrol?" "Ranger alerted on a kid this morning," Devin said, keeping his voice low. "Little girl, maybe 6, standing alone near 4th and Maple." He went full defensive, growling, blocking, the whole protocol. "But she wasn't doing anything. Just watching us." Renata frowned, glancing down at Ranger. "That's not like him." "I know." "You think she was in danger? Someone nearby?" "I don't know," Devin admitted. "I checked missing persons. Nothing. But something was off. She was wearing the same clothes I've seen on a kid in that area before. I think maybe 2 days ago. I didn't pay much attention then." Renata took a sip of her coffee, considering. "Could be a street kid. Homeless family, maybe. Or she's staying with someone nearby and wanders. If Ranger's picking up on something, it's worth keeping an eye on. But unless she's reported missing or in immediate danger, there's not much we can do." "You know that." Devin nodded, but the answer didn't sit right. He looked down at Ranger, who was staring up at him now with those sharp, knowing eyes. The dog's instincts had never failed him. Not once. If Ranger sensed something wrong with that girl, then something was wrong, even if Devin couldn't see it yet. "I'll keep watching," he said quietly. Renata pushed off the desk. "Just don't go full detective mode on a kid who's probably fine. We've got actual cases to work." She walked away, and Devin turned back to his screen. But the image of the girl in the pink jacket stayed with him. Her stillness. Her silence. The way Ranger had positioned himself like a shield between them, not with aggression, but with urgency. Like he was protecting Devin from her, or protecting her from something Devin couldn't see. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of routine calls and paperwork, but Devin's attention kept drifting back to that intersection. He and Ranger walked the same route again in the afternoon, and again the next morning. Both times, the girl was there. Not in the exact same spot, but close. Always within sight of their patrol path. Always alone. She never approached. Never called out. Just watched. And every single time, Ranger's reaction was the same. The moment he caught sight of her, his body tensed, his focus narrowed, and that low, protective growl started building in his chest. It was the behavior of a dog sensing danger. But the danger never materialized. The girl would stand there for a few minutes, and then she'd disappear into the side streets before Devin could get close enough to speak to her. By the third day, Devin was certain of 2 things. The girl was following them, and Ranger was trying to tell him something he didn't yet understand. On the morning of the 4th day, Devin made a decision. He changed their route slightly, looping back toward the area where he'd seen her vanish the day before. Ranger's ears pricked forward as they turned the corner, and then his entire body went still again, focused on a narrow alley between 2 buildings. Devin's pulse quickened. He moved closer, one hand resting on Ranger's back, and peered into the shadows. The girl was there, curled up in a doorway, her pink jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. She wasn't asleep. She was staring right at them, eyes wide and wary, like a wild animal deciding whether to run or freeze. Ranger didn't growl this time. He whined. And in that moment, everything Devin thought he understood shifted. Devin crouched down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening, his hand steady on Ranger's back. The dog's whine had surprised him. It wasn't the sound of a threat response. It was something softer, almost mournful. Like Ranger had finally identified what he'd been sensing all along. And it wasn't danger directed at them. It was something else entirely. The girl didn't move. She stayed pressed against the doorway, her knees drawn up to her chest, her small hands gripping the edges of her jacket like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. Her face was pale, smudged with dirt, and her eyes, those eyes were too old for her body. They held a weariness Devin had seen before, but never in someone so young. "Hey," he said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm a police officer. My name's Devin. This is Ranger." The girl's gaze flicked to the dog, and something flickered across her expression. Not fear, something closer to longing. She stared at Ranger like he was the only safe thing in her world, and the dog responded by lowering himself onto his belly, ears relaxed, his posture completely non-threatening. Devin had never seen him do that before. Not on duty, not without a command. Ranger was making himself small for her. "It's okay," Devin continued, his throat tight. "You're safe. Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The girl's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She shook her head once, a tiny movement, and then her eyes darted past Devin toward the mouth of the alley. Checking for someone. Checking for escape routes. Devin's chest tightened. "Are you out here alone?" he asked, keeping his tone as calm and steady as he could manage. "Do you have somewhere to go? Someone taking care of you?" Another shake of her head. Slower this time, more certain. Devin felt his stomach drop. He'd worked enough cases involving kids to recognize the signs. The unwashed hair, the too thin jacket in cold weather, the way she was curled into herself like she was trying to disappear. This wasn't a child who'd wandered off by accident. This was a child who had nowhere else to be. "Okay," he said softly. "That's okay. We're going to figure it out. Can you tell me your name?" The girl stared at him for a long moment, her fingers tightening on her jacket, and then she whispered something so quiet Devin almost missed it. "Isla." The name settled between them like a fragile thing, and Devin nodded slowly. "Isla? That's a really pretty name. How long have you been out here, Isla?" She didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to Ranger again, and the dog's tail thumped once against the pavement, soft, encouraging. Isla's expression cracked just a little, and Devin saw the beginning of tears pooling in her eyes before she blinked them back, her jaw tightening with the effort of holding herself together. Devin's radio crackled at his shoulder, a burst of static followed by dispatch calling another unit to a traffic stop 6 blocks away. Isla flinched at the sound, her body curling tighter, and Devin immediately turned the volume down, his hand moving slowly so he wouldn't startle her further. "It's just the radio," he said quietly. "Nothing to worry about. I'm going to stay right here with you, okay? I'm not going to make you go anywhere you don't want to go. But I need to know if you're safe. If there's someone I should call, someone who's looking for you." Isla shook her head again, harder this time, and her voice came out stronger, edged with something close to panic. "No, don't call anyone, please." The fear in her words hit Devin like a punch. She wasn't afraid of being alone. She was afraid of being found. His training kicked in, the protocols for dealing with runaways and endangered minors flashing through his mind, but he pushed them aside for the moment. Right now, this child needed to feel safe before he could do anything else. "Okay," he said gently. "I won't call anyone yet, but I need to make sure you're not in danger. Are you staying here? In this doorway?" Isla hesitated, her eyes darting to the side again, and Devin followed her gaze deeper into the alley. There was another building behind the first, its windows boarded up, graffiti scrawled across the brick. Abandoned. Condemned, probably. And if Isla was looking at it like that, like she didn't want him to see it. "Are there other people with you?" Devin asked, his voice careful. "Other kids?" Isla's face went pale, and she scrambled to her feet so fast it startled Ranger into rising as well. But the dog didn't bark or move toward her. He just stood there, watching her with those steady, intelligent eyes, his body language still open and calm. "I have to go," Isla whispered, backing toward the mouth of the alley. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to see the dog. I'm sorry." "Wait," Devin said, rising slowly, his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Isla, please. You don't have to run. I'm not going to take you anywhere you don't want to go. But if there are other kids with you, if you're taking care of someone, I need to know. I can help." Isla stopped, her small frame trembling, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "You can't help," she said, her voice breaking. "Nobody can. They'll just send us back." Devin's heart clenched. Send us back. The words carried so much weight, so much history he couldn't see yet. He took a slow breath, his mind racing through options, through the right thing to say that wouldn't make her bolt. "Back where?" he asked gently. Isla didn't answer. She turned and ran. Devin started to follow, but Ranger barked once, sharp and insistent, and Devin stopped. The dog wasn't looking at Isla. He was looking at the abandoned building behind them, his ears pricked forward, his entire body focused on something inside. Devin felt a shift in his partner's energy, the same protective alertness from before, but softer now, more certain. Ranger knew. He'd known from the beginning. Devin exhaled slowly, his pulse pounding in his ears, and made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called Sergeant Voss, keeping his voice low as she answered. "Renata, I need you to run a search for me. Missing kids, runaways, any open cases involving children in foster placements in this district. I'm at the condemned building on 4th, just past the alley behind the coffee shop. I think we've got more than one kid here, and I think they're hiding from someone." There was a pause on the other end, and then Renata's voice came back, all business. "You found the girl?" "Her name's Isla," Devin said quietly. "And she just told me nobody can help because they'll be sent back. I need to know what she's running from before I make another move." "Copy that. Give me 10 minutes. Don't go in alone." "I won't." Devin ended the call and looked down at Ranger, who was still staring at the building, his body tense but not aggressive. The dog glanced up at him, and Devin could have sworn he saw something like urgency in those dark eyes. "I know, boy," Devin murmured, resting his hand on Ranger's head. "I know. We're going to help her." But first, he needed to understand what he was walking into, and who Isla was so desperate to protect. Devin stayed at the mouth of the alley, his phone gripped tight in one hand, his eyes moving between the condemned building and the street where Isla had disappeared. Ranger sat beside him, alert but steady, his breathing slow and controlled now that the immediate tension had passed. The dog's focus never wavered from the boarded-up structure, and Devin trusted that focus more than anything else in this moment. 10 minutes felt like an hour. When Sergeant Voss finally called back, Devin answered on the first ring. "What did you find?" "3 kids," Renata said, her voice clipped and urgent. "Reported missing from a foster home in the East District 4 days ago. 2 girls and a boy, ages 6, 7, and 8. The case was flagged as runaways, but the foster parents didn't push hard for an active search. Red flags all over the placement history, multiple complaints filed by neighbors, 2 previous investigations that went nowhere. The home still licensed, but barely." Devin's jaw tightened. Names? Isla Garrett, age 6. Marin Cole, age 7. Benji Cole, age 8. Siblings placed together after their mother lost custody 2 years ago. The foster parents are Calvin and Diane Ruskin. And Devin. There's more. One of the previous kids in that home reported physical abuse. Case was closed for lack of evidence. But the social worker noted concerns in the file. These kids aren't just runaways. They're running from something. Devin closed his eyes for a moment, forcing himself to stay calm, to think clearly. Isla's words echoed in his mind. They'll just send us back. And now he understood the terror behind them. She wasn't afraid of being found by strangers. She was afraid of being sent back to the people who were supposed to protect her. "I need CPS here," Devin said quietly. "And a crisis response team. I'm not going in alone, and I'm not letting those kids stay here another night." "Already in motion," Renata replied. "Crisis team is en route. ETA 12 minutes. CPS is sending a supervisor. Devin, be careful. If these kids have been hiding for 4 days, they're going to be scared out of their minds. Don't push too hard." "I won't," Devin said. "But I'm not leaving this spot until I know they're safe." He ended the call and looked down at Ranger, who was still watching the building with that same unwavering focus. Devin crouched beside him, running his hand along the dog's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You knew," Devin murmured. "You knew she wasn't a threat. You were trying to protect her, trying to make me see her." Ranger's ears twitched, and he glanced up at Devin with those dark, intelligent eyes. There was no judgment in that gaze, only certainty. The dog had done his job. Now it was Devin's turn to do his. He rose slowly and moved toward the condemned building, staying just outside the entrance, his voice pitched low and calm. "Isla, if you can hear me, I know you're scared. I know you don't want to go back. And I promise you, I'm not going to let that happen. But I need you to trust me. You and the other kids. Marin and Benji, you're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. I just want to make sure you're safe." There was no response. Only the faint sound of wind pushing through the broken windows above, the distant hum of traffic, and Ranger's steady breathing beside him. Devin waited, counting the seconds, giving the words time to settle. He knew they were listening. Kids like this. Kids who'd learned to survive by staying invisible. They heard everything. "I brought my partner with me," Devin continued, his hand resting on Ranger's head. "You've seen him before. His name is Ranger. He's been watching out for you, Isla. He knew you needed help before I did. He's a good dog, the best I've ever worked with, and he's not going to hurt you. None of us are." A soft sound came from inside the building, a shuffle of movement, maybe a whisper, and then silence again. Devin's pulse quickened, but he didn't move closer. Not yet. He needed them to come to him, to make the choice to trust him, because forcing his way in would only terrify them more. "I know you've been out here for 4 days," he said gently. "I know you're cold and hungry and tired, and I know you're trying to take care of each other. That's really brave, Isla. You're a really brave kid. But you don't have to do this alone anymore. There are people who can help. People who won't send you back to the place you ran from, I promise." Another sound, closer this time. And then, slowly, a shadow moved in the doorway. It wasn't Isla. It was a boy, taller and thinner than her, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. He looked at Devin with hollow eyes, his body positioned protectively in front of something, or someone. Behind him, Benji. Devin's chest tightened at the sight of him, at the sheer weight of responsibility this 8-year-old was carrying. "You're a cop," Benji said, his voice flat and wary. "Cops took us there the first time." "I know," Devin said quietly, "and I'm sorry. I can't change what happened before, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again. I'm not going to take you back to the Ruskins. I'm going to make sure you go somewhere safe. Somewhere you can actually be kids again." Benji's expression didn't change. "You can't promise that." "You're right," Devin admitted. "I can't control everything, but I can control what happens right now. And right now I'm asking you to let me help. You and your sister and Isla. You've done everything you can to keep them safe, Benji. You've done more than any kid should ever have to do. But you're tired. I can see it. And you don't have to carry this alone anymore." Benji's jaw tightened, and for a moment Devin thought he was going to retreat back into the building, but then Ranger took a single step forward, slow and deliberate, and lay down on the pavement, his head resting on his paws, his eyes soft and open. The dog made himself small again, just like he had with Isla, and something in Benji's expression cracked. "The dog's really not going to hurt us?" he asked, his voice smaller now. "Never," Devin said. "Ranger's job is to protect people. That's all he's ever done. And right now, he's trying to protect you." Benji looked down at Ranger for a long moment, and then he turned his head slightly, speaking to someone inside. "Marin, Isla, come here." Two small figures emerged from the shadows. Marin, a girl with tangled blonde hair and wide, frightened eyes, clung to Benji's arm. Isla stood on his other side, her face tear-streaked and pale, her gaze locked on Ranger. The three of them stood there in the doorway, exhausted and terrified and so heartbreakingly small, and Devin felt something break open in his chest. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now, I promise." Benji took a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging with the weight of finally letting go, and he nodded once. "Okay." Sirens sounded in the distance, growing closer, and Devin saw the kids tense at the noise. He held up a hand, his voice calm and steady. "That's the people I called. They're going to help. Just stay with me, okay? Stay with Ranger. He's not going to let anything happen to you." And as the crisis response van pulled up to the curb and the trained professionals stepped out with blankets and kind words, Ranger rose slowly and moved to stand between the children and the strangers, his body a quiet, solid barrier of safety. The kids didn't run. They stayed close to the dog, their small hands reaching out to touch his fur, and Devin realized with absolute certainty that his partner had saved them long before anyone else had even known they needed saving. The crisis team moved with practiced efficiency, their voices low and calm as they approached the children. But Devin could see the way Benji's body had gone rigid again, the way Marin pressed herself against Ranger's side, the way Isla's eyes tracked every movement with the hyper-vigilance of someone who'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted. The dog stood perfectly still, allowing the children to use him as an anchor, his presence the only thing keeping them from bolting back into the shadows. A woman in a dark blue jacket knelt a few feet away, her hands visible and empty, her expression gentle but not overly sweet. Sarah Chen, the crisis counselor Devin had worked with before on domestic calls. She knew how to read trauma, knew how to move slowly enough that fear didn't turn into panic. "Hi there," Sarah said softly, her gaze moving between the three kids without fixing on any one of them too long. "My name is Sarah. I'm here to make sure you're okay. Nobody's gonna make you do anything you don't want to do. We just want to check that you're not hurt, and that we're gonna find you somewhere warm to rest. Does that sound all right?" Benji didn't answer, but he didn't refuse either. His hand was still gripping Marin's shoulder, protective and exhausted. And Devin could see the moment the boy's strength finally gave out. His knees buckled slightly, and Sarah moved closer. Not fast, just present, ready to catch him if he fell. "You've been taking care of them, haven't you?" Sarah said quietly, her voice aimed at Benji now. "Your sister and Isla. You've been making sure they stayed safe." Benji's jaw worked, his eyes shining with unshed tears, and he nodded once. "I tried." "You did more than try," Sarah said. "You kept them alive. That's not easy. You're really strong, Benji. But you don't have to be strong right now. We've got you." The boy's face crumpled, and the tears he'd been holding back for 4 days finally broke free. Marin started crying too, her small body shaking with sobs, and Isla just stood there, staring at Ranger like the dog was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. Devon's throat tightened, and he crouched down beside Ranger, his hand resting on the dog's back, grounding himself in the steady warmth of his partner's presence. Sarah gestured to the paramedics waiting near the van, and they approached slowly, carrying blankets and medical kits. Benji flinched when one of them got too close, and Ranger shifted his position slightly, placing himself between the boy and the stranger without any command from Devon. The paramedic paused, reading the dog's body language, and then took a step back, giving Benji space to breathe. "The dog stays with us," Benji said, his voice raw and desperate. "If the dog stays, we'll go, but he has to stay." Devon looked at Sarah, who nodded once, and then he turned back to Benji. "Ranger's not going anywhere. He'll stay with you as long as you need him. I promise." Benji wiped his face with the back of his hand and nodded, his shoulders sagging with relief. Marin reached out tentatively and touched Ranger's head, her fingers trembling, and the dog turned his face toward her, his expression calm and patient. Isla finally moved, taking a small step forward, and then another until she was close enough to bury her face in Ranger's fur. Her small body shook with silent sobs, and the dog stood perfectly still, letting her hold on to him like he was the only safe thing left in the world. The paramedics moved in carefully, checking vitals and wrapping blankets around the children's shoulders, their movements slow and deliberate. Devon watched as they examined Benji's hands, scraped and bruised from trying to pry open boarded windows, and Marin's arms, where faint bruises in the shape of fingers were already starting to yellow with age. Isla's feet were blistered and raw, her shoes worn through at the soles, and the paramedic's expression tightened when she saw them. "We need to get them to the hospital," the paramedic said quietly, glancing at Devon. "Full exams, documentation, and they need fluids. They're dehydrated." Devon nodded, his stomach twisting. Documentation. That meant photographs of injuries, medical records that would be used in court, evidence that would hopefully shut down the Ruskin placement for good. He looked at the kids, at their hollow eyes and thin frames and the way they clung to Ranger like he was a lifeline. And he felt a surge of anger so sharp it made his hands shake. "Can the dog come in the ambulance?" Benji asked, his voice small and fragile now that the adrenaline was wearing off. The paramedic hesitated, glancing at her partner and then at Devon. "That's not usually protocol." "Make an exception," Devon said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Ranger's a certified therapy animal in addition to his patrol work. If these kids need him to feel safe, he goes with them." The paramedic looked at the children, at the way they were all pressed close to the dog, and nodded slowly. "All right, he can ride with us." Sarah stepped closer to Devon, her voice low. "CPS supervisor is meeting us at the hospital. They're pulling the Ruskin license pending a full investigation, and they're fast-tracking emergency placements for all 3 kids. It's going to take a few hours to process everything, but they're not going back. Not tonight. Not ever." Devon exhaled slowly, the tightness in his chest easing just a fraction. "Good. That's good." "You did the right thing," Sarah said quietly, "calling us instead of trying to handle it alone. These kids needed more than just a rescue. They needed a system that would actually protect them this time." Devon nodded, but his gaze stayed on Ranger, who was still standing calmly between the children as they were guided toward the ambulance. The dog glanced back at him once, and Devon saw the question in those dark eyes. "Are you coming?" "I'm right behind you, boy," Devon murmured, and Ranger's tail swished once before he turned his attention back to Isla, who hadn't let go of his fur. The ride to the hospital was quiet, the back of the ambulance filled with the soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional sniffle from one of the kids. Devon sat on the bench beside Ranger, his hand resting on the dog's shoulders, while the paramedics worked efficiently and gently. Benji sat across from him, his eyes red and swollen, his sister curled against his side. Isla sat on the floor next to Ranger, her small hand still tangled in his fur, her breathing finally starting to slow. "Thank you," Benji said suddenly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine, "for not making us go back." Devon's throat tightened, and he leaned forward slightly, meeting the boy's eyes. "You don't have to thank me. You shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. I'm sorry no one saw it sooner." Benji looked down at his hands, at the cuts and bruises that told the story of 4 days spent trying to survive, and nodded slowly. "The dog saw it." Devon glanced at Ranger, who was resting his head on Isla's shoulder now, his eyes half closed but still alert. "Yeah," Devon said quietly. "He did." "Is he always this smart?" Marin asked, her voice small and shy. Devon smiled, the first real smile he'd managed all day. "Always. Ranger's the best partner I've ever had. He sees things the rest of us miss." Isla finally looked up, her tear-streaked face pale but a little less frightened now. "Can we see him again? After we leave the hospital?" Devon's chest ached at the question, at the hope in her voice, and he nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. Anytime you want. Ranger would like that." The ambulance pulled into the hospital bay, and the back doors opened to a team of nurses and social workers waiting to receive them. Devon climbed out first, Ranger at his side, and then turned back to help the kids down. They moved slowly, reluctantly, their eyes darting between the strangers and the dog, but they didn't run. They stayed close to Ranger, and Ranger stayed close to them, his body a steady, grounding presence as they were guided inside. And as the automatic doors slid shut behind them, Devon realized that his partner hadn't just alerted to danger 4 days ago. Ranger had alerted to suffering, to a child who needed help but didn't know how to ask for it, and he'd refused to let Devon look away until the truth came out. The hospital's pediatric wing smelled like antiseptic and something sweeter. Apple juice, maybe, or the kind of soap meant to be gentle on children's skin. Devon stood in the hallway outside the examination rooms, his back against the wall, watching nurses move in and out with practiced efficiency. Ranger sat beside him, calm but alert, his ears tracking every footstep, every voice that rose above the quiet hum of medical equipment. The dog hadn't relaxed completely. Not yet, because the children were still behind closed doors where he couldn't see them. Sarah Chen emerged from one of the rooms, her expression carefully neutral, but Devon could read the tension in her shoulders. She walked over to him, clipboard in hand, and exhaled slowly before speaking. "They're stable," she said quietly. "Dehydrated, malnourished, and covered in bruises in various stages of healing. The doctor's documenting everything. Benji has a fractured finger that never healed properly, probably a few weeks old. Marin has cigarette burns on her arms. Isla," Sarah's voice wavered slightly, "Isla has marks consistent with being restrained. Zip ties, the doctor thinks. Around her wrists." Devon's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ached. He looked down at Ranger, whose dark eyes were fixed on the door Sarah had just come through, and he felt the same protective rage he knew his partner was feeling. These were children. Babies. And someone had hurt them systematically, deliberately, for long enough that their bodies carried a map of the abuse. "The Ruskins?" Devon asked, his voice low and dangerous. "CPS is at their home right now with 2 patrol units. They're being detained for questioning. The state's attorney is already building a case. Multiple counts of child abuse, neglect, endangerment. Between the medical evidence and the statements the kids are giving, it's going to be airtight. They're done." Devon nodded, but the satisfaction he should have felt didn't come. It was too late to undo the damage. Too late to give these kids back the childhood they'd lost. All he could do now was make sure they had a chance at something better. "What happens next?" he asked. "Emergency foster placements," Sarah said. "We're trying to keep them together. Sibling sets are hard to place, especially with a third unrelated child, but we're working on it. In the meantime, they'll stay in a short-term shelter tonight. It's safe, staffed 24/7, and they'll have their own space. It's not perfect, but it's better than where they've been." The door to the exam room opened, and a nurse stepped out, glancing at Devin. "They're asking for the dog." Ranger was on his feet before Devin could respond, his body tense and ready, and Devin felt a swell of pride at his partner's focus. The nurse smiled slightly, stepping aside to let them pass, and Devin followed Ranger into the room. All 3 children were sitting on a single hospital bed, Benji in the middle with his arms around both girls, their small bodies pressed close together like they were still trying to shield each other from the world. Their faces were cleaner now, the dirt washed away to reveal pale skin and dark circles under their eyes. They were wearing hospital gowns that were too big, their own clothes bagged and labeled as evidence, and they looked impossibly fragile under the fluorescent lights. But when Ranger walked in, Isla's face lit up, just a little, and Marin reached out her hand toward him. Benji's expression didn't change, but his shoulders dropped slightly, like the presence of the dog was the only thing that allowed him to stop being the protector for a moment. "Hey, Ranger," Isla whispered, her voice still hoarse from crying. The dog moved straight to her, placing his head on the edge of the bed near her lap, and she buried her fingers in his fur again, holding on like she was afraid he'd disappear. Devin stayed near the door, giving them space, watching as Ranger worked his quiet magic. The dog shifted his attention between all 3 kids, letting Marin rest her hand on his shoulders, letting Benji scratch behind his ears with his uninjured hand. Ranger's tail wagged slowly, gently, and the tension in the room eased just a fraction. "We have to go to a shelter tonight," Benji said after a long silence, his gaze fixed on Devin. "That's what the lady said. Just for tonight," Devin confirmed. "They're working on finding you a real placement. Somewhere you can stay together. It's going to take a little time, but they're trying." "Will the dog be there?" Marin asked, her voice small and hopeful. Devin's chest tightened. "Ranger has to come back to the station with me. He's a working dog. He has a job to do. But I promise you can visit him anytime you want. We'll make sure of it." Isla's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, and she shook her head. "I don't want him to go. He's the only one who—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. Devin understood. Ranger was the only one who hadn't failed them. The only one who'd seen them when everyone else had looked away. The only presence that felt safe in a world that had taught them safety didn't exist. Devin moved closer, crouching down so he was at eye level with Isla, his voice soft but steady. "Ranger's not going away. He's just going back to work. But he's always going to remember you. And I'm always going to remember you. You're not alone anymore, Isla. None of you are." Isla stared at him, her small face streaked with tears, and then she looked at Ranger, who was watching her with those calm, knowing eyes. The dog leaned in and licked her hand once, gentle, deliberate, and Isla's breathing hitched. "He really does remember us," she whispered. "Always," Devin said. "Dogs don't forget the people they protect. And Ranger protected you from the moment he saw you." Benji's voice was quiet when he spoke, barely more than a whisper. "He knew we were scared, even when we tried to hide it." "He did," Devin agreed. "That's his job, to see the things people try to hide. And he did his job perfectly." A soft knock sounded at the door, and Sarah stepped in, her expression gentle but firm. "The transport to the shelter is here. We need to get you three settled in for the night. You'll have dinner, clean clothes, and your own beds. And tomorrow, we'll start figuring out the next steps." The children didn't move at first. Benji's arms tightened around his sister and Isla, and Devin saw the fear flicker back into their faces. The instinct to run, to refuse, to stay in the only moment that felt even remotely safe. But then Ranger stood, his movements slow and deliberate, and walked to the door. He paused there, looking back at them, his tail wagging once. And somehow, that simple gesture, the dog moving forward without fear, gave them the courage to follow. They climbed down from the bed slowly, their hospital gowns rustling, their bare feet padding softly against the tile floor. Sarah handed them each a small bag with toiletries and a change of clothes, and they clutched the bags like lifelines. Ranger walked beside them as they moved through the hospital corridors, past nurses and doctors who smiled gently, past waiting rooms filled with strangers, until they reached the front entrance where a white van with child services markings was waiting. Isla stopped at the door, turning back to look at Ranger one more time, and the dog moved close to her, pressing his head against her side. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her small body shaking, and whispered something Devin couldn't hear. Ranger stayed still, letting her hold him, and when she finally let go, the dog licked her face once, soft, reassuring. "We'll see you soon," Devin said quietly. "I promise." Isla nodded, wiping her eyes, and then climbed into the van with Benji and Marin. The doors closed gently, and the vehicle pulled away into the night, taillights fading into the flow of traffic. Devin stood there for a long moment, Ranger at his side, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle over him like a heavy blanket. "Good boy," he murmured, his hand resting on Ranger's head. "You did good." Ranger looked up at him, and Devin could have sworn he saw something like satisfaction in those dark eyes. The dog had done exactly what he was trained to do. He'd protected the vulnerable. He'd refused to look away. And he'd made sure Devin understood what his instincts had been screaming from the very beginning. Those children weren't a threat. They were the ones who needed to be saved. 3 weeks passed before Devin saw Isla again. 3 weeks of paperwork and follow-up calls, and late-night conversations with Sarah Chen about the investigation into the Ruskin home. The state's attorney had moved fast, faster than Devin had expected, and the charges were already filed: criminal court, family court, license revocation hearings. The machine was finally working the way it was supposed to, grinding slowly but thoroughly toward justice. But Devin thought about those kids every day. Every time he and Ranger walked past the intersection where he'd first seen Isla in her pink jacket. Every time they passed the condemned building where 3 children had tried to survive on their own, he wondered if they were okay, if they were eating enough, if they were sleeping, if they'd stopped flinching every time an adult raised their voice. Sarah had called him that morning to tell him Isla wanted to visit. She'd been placed with a foster family, a couple named the Hendersons, who'd been licensed for years and had a track record of trauma-informed care. Benji and Marin had been placed together in a different home, but the goal was reunification once a placement large enough for all 3 could be secured. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what the kids deserved after everything they'd been through. But it was better. It was safe. And for now, that had to be enough. Devin stood in the precinct lobby now, Ranger sitting calmly at his side, watching the glass doors for any sign of movement. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his body relaxed but attentive, and Devin could feel the quiet energy humming through his partner. Ranger remembered. Of course he did. Dogs didn't forget the people who mattered. The door slid open, and Isla walked in flanked by a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Mrs. Henderson, Devin assumed. Isla was wearing new clothes, jeans that actually fit, a purple sweater, sneakers that weren't falling apart. Her hair had been washed and brushed, pulled into two small braids, and her face looked fuller than it had in the hospital. Healthier, but her eyes were still wary. Still carrying that weight no 6-year-old should have to carry. And Devin's chest tightened at the sight of her. Then Isla saw Ranger, and everything changed. Her face lit up, not just a smile, but something deeper. Something that looked like relief and joy and recognition all tangled together. She broke into a run, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, and Ranger stood immediately, his tail wagging in wide, sweeping arcs as she reached him. Isla dropped to her knees and threw her arms around the dog's neck, burying her face in his fur, and Ranger stood perfectly still, letting her hold him as tightly as she needed to. Mrs. Henderson stopped beside Devin, her expression soft and understanding. "She's been asking about him every day," the woman said quietly. "She talks about Ranger more than anything else, how he stayed with her, how he made her feel safe." Devin nodded, his throat tight, watching as Isla pulled back just enough to look into Ranger's eyes. The dog's expression was calm and steady, his gaze locked on hers, and Devin could see the moment the fear in Isla's face eased just a little. Like Ranger's presence was proof that the world could still hold something good. "Can I pet him?" Isla asked, her voice small and hopeful, even though her hands were already tangled in his fur. "You can do whatever you want," Devin said gently. "He's your friend. He's been waiting to see you." Isla's eyes filled with tears, but this time they didn't look like the tears of fear or exhaustion. They looked like relief, like something fragile and broken was starting to mend. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against Ranger's, whispering something Devin couldn't hear, and the dog's tail wagged once, twice, slow and deliberate. Mrs. Henderson glanced at Devin, her voice low. "The caseworker said you're the one who found them, that you didn't stop looking until you knew they were safe." Devin shook his head. "Ranger found them. I just followed his lead. He's a good dog," Mrs. Henderson said, her gaze moving back to Isla, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor with Ranger lying beside her, his head resting in her lap. "She told me he was the only one who saw her, the only one who didn't look away." Devin exhaled slowly, the weight of those words settling over him. He'd replayed that first morning 100 times in his head. The moment Ranger had frozen and growled at a little girl in a pink jacket. The way the dog had refused to let it go, even when Devin couldn't see the danger. Ranger hadn't been protecting Devin from Isla. He'd been protecting Isla by making sure Devin couldn't ignore her. He wasn't alerting to a threat, Devin said quietly, more to himself than to Mrs. Henderson. He was alerting to someone who needed help, someone everyone else had missed. Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "That's a rare gift. For a dog or a person." Isla looked up then, her small face still streaked with drying tears, and she smiled at Devin. A real smile, fragile but genuine. "Can I come see Ranger again?" she asked. "After today?" "Anytime you want," Devin said, crouching down to her level. "You're always welcome here, Isla, always." "Even when I'm not scared anymore?" she asked, her voice hesitant, like she wasn't sure that day would ever come. Devin's chest ached at the question, at the hope buried beneath the doubt, and he nodded firmly. "Even then, especially then, Ranger doesn't just help people when they're scared. He helps people because he cares about them. And he cares about you." Isla looked down at the dog, her fingers still tangled in his fur, and Ranger lifted his head to lick her cheek once, soft and reassuring. She giggled, a small surprised sound, and Devin felt something loosen in his chest. That laugh was proof that healing was possible, proof that even after everything she'd been through, Isla was still a child who could find joy in simple things. Mrs. Henderson checked her watch, and gave Isla a gentle smile. "We should probably get going soon, sweetheart. We've got lunch waiting at home, and your new room still needs decorating." Isla's expression flickered with something that might have been anxiety, but she nodded and slowly stood, her hand trailing along Ranger's back as she moved. The dog rose with her, staying close, and when Isla turned to face Devin, her voice was quiet but steady. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up, for finding us." Devin's throat tightened, and he had to swallow hard before he could speak. "You don't have to thank me, Isla. I'm just glad you're safe. But you didn't look away," Isla said, her gaze dropping to Ranger. "Just like him. You didn't look away." Devin glanced at his partner, at the dog who'd refused to let him ignore a child in need, and he realized that Isla was right. Ranger had taught him something in those 4 days, something he should have already known but had somehow forgotten in the grind of routine and protocol. That sometimes the most important part of the job wasn't stopping the visible threats. It was seeing the invisible suffering, the people who'd learned to hide, the ones everyone else walked past without a second glance. Ranger had seen Isla when no one else had, and he'd made sure Devin saw her too. "Ranger's a good teacher," Devin said quietly, his hand resting on the dog's head. "I'm still learning from him." Isla smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. She leaned down and hugged Ranger one more time, whispering something into his fur, and then she took Mrs. Henderson's hand and walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold, looking back one last time, and Ranger's tail wagged in response, a promise that he'd be here whenever she needed him. The doors slid shut, and Devin stood in the quiet lobby, his partner at his side, feeling the weight of everything that had happened finally start to settle into something he could carry. They'd done their job, not just the way the manual said to do it, but the way it was supposed to be done. By paying attention, by trusting instinct, by refusing to look away. Ranger glanced up at him, and Devin saw satisfaction in those dark, intelligent eyes. The dog knew. He'd always known. And Devin would never doubt that instinct again. "Good boy," Devin murmured, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "You saved her, buddy. You saved all of them." Ranger's tail wagged once, and together they turned and walked back into the precinct, ready for whatever came next, knowing that sometimes the most important calls were the ones you didn't hear over the radio. Sometimes they were the ones only your partner could see.